We picture Viking funerals as romantic scenes from Hollywood. A hero laid on a ship, a flaming arrow arching through the mist, fading into Valhalla. But the reality, recorded in 922 AD by the Arab diplomat Ahmad ibn Fadlan, is far more terrifying. He witnessed the funeral of a Rus chieftain on the Volga River, a ritual that was less about honor and more about a blood debt. When the chief died, his slaves were asked a simple, chilling question: who will die with him? One girl volunteered, or perhaps was coerced by the promise of paradise. For days she was intoxicated and celebrated, but her end was gruesome. She was led into a tent on the ship where an old priestess, known as the Angel of Death, waited with a dagger. While men beat their shields to drown out her screams, the girl was sexually abused by the chieftain's kinsmen as a form of tribute, then strangled and stabbed. Her body was placed next to her master, surrounded by dead horses and weapons, before the entire ship was set ablaze. This wasn't murder in their eyes. It was a spiritual transaction. They believed the chieftain needed a crew for the afterlife, and human life was just another form of currency to pay the toll. The fire was meant to purify the flesh and send the smoke and the souls straight to the gods. But if you think voluntary sacrifice is where the horror ends, you haven't heard about what happened in the sacred groves of Sweden. What if the gods demanded not just one life, but 9 of everything? Every 9 years, the Vikings gathered at the Temple of Uppsala for a festival that makes modern horror movies look tame. This wasn't a harvest fair, it was a cosmic negotiation written in blood, to appease the gods Odin, Thor, and Freyr, and to ensure victory and fertility for the coming years. The priests conducted a ritual of mass slaughter. The chronicler, Adam of Bremen, recounted seeing 72 bodies hanging from the trees in the sacred grove adjacent to the temple. The sight must have been nightmarish, the rotting corpses of humans swaying in the wind next to the carcasses of dogs and horses. The number 9 was sacred in Norse mythology, representing the 9 worlds held in the branches of Yggdrasil, the world tree. So for 9 days, they sacrificed one male of every living species daily. The blood was collected to bless the altars and the people, a red baptism that bound the community to their gods. These men weren't criminals. They were likely considered high-value offerings, perhaps even willing martyrs believing their death would save their people from famine or defeat. It was a brutal calculus, a few lives given in agony to buy survival for the many. However, not everyone who died went to the gods. Some were feared so much that the living had to ensure they stayed dead. What do you do when you're terrified your enemy might crawl back out of their grave? In the Viking mind, death wasn't always a permanent state. They lived in terror of the Draugr, the undead. Unlike the mindless zombies of pop culture, a Draugr was a corporeal ghost with superhuman strength, driven by envy and rage to torment the living. To prevent a hated enemy or a person with a bad death from rising again, the Vikings enacted specific preventative mutilations. Archaeologists have found graves where the body was pinned down with large rocks, or more disturbingly, where the head was severed and placed between the knees or under the armpit. This wasn't disrespect. It was a tactical necro-defense. By confusing the anatomy of the corpse, they believed the spirit would be unable to navigate its way back to the world of the living. Some bodies were found with their feet bound together or shoes filled with stones to weigh them down. It reveals a society deeply paranoid about the thin veil between life and death. They believed that if you didn't respect the rules of the grave would come to you. But sometimes, rocks and decapitation weren't enough. For the most cursed individuals, the Vikings turned to the landscape itself, using the bogs as a prison for the soul. Scattered across the lonely, mist-covered wetlands of Denmark and Sweden, peat diggers have uncovered faces staring back from the mud faces preserved for over 1,000 years. These are the bog bodies, and they tell a story of punishment that goes beyond simple execution. Unlike the honored dead burned on pyres, these individuals were pinned into the swamp with wooden stakes, often naked, strangled, or with their throats slit. The chemical environment of the bog turned their skin into leather and preserved their expressions of terror perfectly. Scholars debate whether these were criminals, traitors, or sacrifices to fertility goddesses, but the placement suggests shame. The bog was a liminal space, neither land nor water, a place where you could dispose of someone you wanted to erase from existence. By sinking them into the black water, the Vikings denied them a funeral, denied them a marker, and perhaps denied them entry into the afterlife entirely. It was the ultimate cancellation, a fate reserved for those who had transgressed the most sacred laws of the clan. Yet, for the elite, the goal was the exact opposite: to be so visible in death that no one could ever forget you. How do you build a tomb that screams power for a millennium? For a Viking king or queen, a hole in the ground wasn't enough. They needed a vehicle. The Oseberg ship burial in Norway is the most spectacular example of this obsession with the journey. 2 women were buried inside a magnificent 21-meter-long oak longship, intricately carved with gripping beasts. But they didn't just get a boat. They were buried under a mound of earth the size of a small hill. This mound was a physical scar on the landscape, a permanent reminder to every passerby of the power that lay beneath. Inside, the women were surrounded by a hoard of goods that would make a dragon jealous: sleighs, beds, tapestries, and the sacrificed bodies of 15 horses. The amount of wealth taken out of circulation to be rotted in the ground is staggering. It shows that, for the Vikings, you could take it with you. The ship wasn't symbolic. They believed it was literally transporting them to the other side. The mound acted as a portal, a place where the living could commune with the ancestor who was now a guardian spirit of the land. But status wasn't just about what you were buried with. It was about how you faced the end. In a culture of warriors, your final breath was your final performance. The Vikings weaponized their own mortality. They believed that a man's reputation was the only thing that survived him, so how you died mattered more than how you lived. The saga of Ragnar Lothbrok perfectly encapsulates this fatalistic bravado. Captured by the English King Iea and thrown into a snake pit, Ragnar didn't beg for mercy. Instead, he laughed. He recited a poem, a death song, predicting the vengeance his sons would bring. The piglets would squeal if they knew how the old boar suffers. This wasn't just toughness, it was psychological warfare. By refusing to show fear, the Viking denied his enemy the satisfaction of victory. This ethos permeated the culture. Warriors would joke as they were executed. One famous account tells of a man who asked the executioner to strike him in the face so he could see the axe coming, just to prove he wouldn't blink. They turned the moment of death into a punchline, ensuring their names would be sung in the halls of Valhalla while their killers were forgotten. However, some Vikings wanted to wear their warrior status permanently, carving it directly into their bones while they were still alive. Imagine standing on a shield wall, looking into the screaming face of a berserker, and seeing that his teeth are carved with horizontal red stripes. Archaeologists have discovered Viking skulls in Sweden and England with deep, horizontal grooves filed into the front incisors. This wasn't decay, it was deliberate body modification. It's highly likely these grooves were filled with resin or pigment, creating a terrifying visual effect when the warrior bared his teeth. This practice, possibly learned from contact with West African or American cultures during their vast travels, served as a permanent badge of courage. The pain of having your teeth filed without anesthetic would have been excruciating, proving the warrior's threshold for pain. It was a way to say, "I have already endured agony you cannot imagine." It marked them as members of an elite brotherhood, perhaps the Jomsvikings, a legendary mercenary order. In death, these skulls grin at us with a customized menace that has lasted 1,000 years. But for the average Norseman, death was less about intimidation and more about identity. The things they took to the grave reveal the heartbreaking humanity behind the axes. When a common Viking died, they didn't get a ship, but they didn't go empty-handed. Their graves are touching capsules of their daily lives. A seamstress would be buried with her favorite needle case. A child might be laid to rest with a toy wooden boat or a glass bead. These items were grave goods, essential tools for the spiritual journey. They believed the afterlife was a reflection of this one. and you needed your tools to continue your work. It was a deeply practical view of eternity. Valhalla wasn't just for fighting, it was for living. But there was a fate worse than death, the fate of the Skognger, the wolf in the woods. In Norse law, a person could be outlawed for heinous crimes. This meant they lost all rights. They could be killed by anyone with impunity, and they were denied a funeral. Their bodies were left to the beasts, their names forbidden to be spoken. To a Viking, who valued reputation above all, this was total annihilation. They were erased from the story of their people, a punishment that stung more than any fire or blade. So, as we look back at these rituals, from the fires of the Volga to the lonely bogs of Denmark, we see a culture that stared into the abyss and didn't blink. They lived for the story that would be told after they were gone. If you want to uncover more secrets from the dark corners of history that textbooks ignore, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. What would you want buried with you to prove who you were? Let us know in the comments below.